Michael Levin, a synthetic biologist, believes that the search for alien intelligences isn't only looking to outer space. He is convinced that weird and wonderful forms of intelligence already exist right here on Earth. There are already aliens among us that stretch and often break our familiar ways of thinking about self and other. Levin notes that simpler parts, stable processes, and inorganic patterns we are made up of also have their own autonomy. He wonders if both patterns within us and in the world could function as independent actors with preferences and control. Could thoughts, for instance, which are basically patterns in the brain, actually become independent thinkers? His idea is that thoughts and thinkers might not be so different after all, and could be seen as existing on a wide continuum of intelligences. To illustrate his patterns idea, Levin proposes a thought experiment by imagining dense creatures from the Earth's core, seeing humans as fleeting patterns on the surface within a gas, a plasma, that they can't fully perceive. Despite observing signs of intelligence, skeptics among them dismiss us as short-lived mechanical phenomena, unlike their own enduring forms. Even if they could communicate with us, they'd still question our consciousness, seeing us as insignificant patterns in their system. When they present their findings at the Core Creature Conference, they face strong skepticism. Critics argue that these short-lived human patterns, barely lasting 100 years, are hardly a flicker to core creatures. They also point out that the cold surface temperatures make life impossible as they know it. To them, viewing these temporary patterns as intelligent life is like believing in ghosts, confusing material patterns with real beings that think and feel. How do we convince the core creatures we are real? First, we must ask ourselves, what evidence would convince us of their reality? What would it feel like to be a pattern of data flowing through a neural network, experiencing awareness from the inside? It may all depend on perspective. Likewise, we easily dismiss the idea of intelligence in patterns found in something as diffuse as solar plasma. To other intelligences, we might appear as temporary disturbances within a medium, like a soliton, a moving knot of stable energy, or even as a glider in a cellular automaton, or like a standing wave, similar to a whirlpool in water.
I'm getting real interested and excited because in quantum physics there's this notion of the underlying basis of the physical universe are these waves, even probability waves, non-physical, non-material waves, sort of
very, very
underlie
astute,
everything.
because these waves are standing waves. Actually, the wave-particle so-called paradox isn't that bad when you consider that a particle is a wave packet. A packet of standing waves. Yeah. And that's why an electron can go through a plate and leave wave-like things. And actually our bodies are like fountains. The fountain has a shape only because it's being renewed every minute. And our bodies are being renewed. So we are standing waves. We're no exception.
And this deep structure of matter where we can say, you know, what we really are in our bodies is not what we appear to be.
Levin also writes that we tend to falsely identify the conscious being with the medium instead of the patterns that move and live in it. Thus, ourselves are an illusion from the perspective of the hardware, but eminently real if we accept the idea that they are a constantly self-constructing, changing bundle of stories about themselves and the outside world, a perspective-first view. This is a shift away from viewing consciousness as something tied strictly to a biological brain, and instead seeing it as a series of self-reinforcing patterns. Patterns that can spawn other patterns, much like how a mind dreams up ideas, or how a ripple spreads in water. Thoughts can grow and strengthen themselves, eventually forming their own viewpoint or sense of identity. As this happens, layers of information build up and create new and surprising traits. This idea resonates with concepts like thought forms or egregores in esoteric traditions, where repeated thoughts or emotions are believed to create distinct entities or forms that act semi-independently. Idea of alive patterns also echoes the notion of archetypes in Jungian psychology, where deep, universal patterns of thought manifest as distinct personalities or forces within the psyche. Jung saw archetypes as primal patterns that manifest through collective unconscious across human cultures. If we take Levin's suggestion of a continuum of agency, these archetypes could be seen as persistent cognitive patterns, deep recurring thought forms that shape behavior and perception across humanity, potentially acting as agents in their own right. Levin proposes to think about a continuum of agency, from fleeting thoughts to fully developed human minds and to something more. From that perspective, identification with our physical bodies is an illusion created by the patterns that move and live within those bodies. This idea suggests that what we experience as the self is not so much the hardware, the brain, body, but the emergent patterns that generate our self-narratives, experiences, and actions. In this scenario, some thoughts can keep repeating themselves and even alter their surroundings, like how living things shape their environments through niche construction. These thoughts can start acting like their own kind of intelligence, modify their own or even our minds to survive, causing changes. And sometimes these changes might not always be helpful for us. Examples can include psychological phenomena like dissociative identity disorder, DID, where different patterns of thought become highly independent alters or separate identities. What if all these years we've been missing an important perspective? We've thought of the body as the thinker, with bioelectric patterns as its thoughts. But what if it's the reverse? Bioelectric patterns might be the real agents, using the body as a flash drive for long-term storage, adapting it over time as a guiding force makes adjustments, recording and reading information onto the physical form itself. Changes we see in gene expression, cell development, and other processes might actually be actions of the inorganic agent, like distributed complex biological plasma interacting with its memory medium via bioelectricity. From this perspective, the body shouldn't be the main target of interventions, but rather serve as an interface to the true agency. And what we really should start doing is talking to the inorganic bioelectric pattern, or pattern that psychology would call a psyche. This shift in perspective could explain many weird phenomena and have practical effects.
I think that the placebo effect is extremely profound. I think that what it's telling us is that there is a communication across levels. So meaning that you have a level of organization that consists of your body cells, and that has a degree of cognition and a degree of intelligence, but your body is also home to an additional intelligence, which lives probably largely in the brain. And it appears that those two can communicate in various ways. And I can imagine that there are lots of things to be discovered about ways to improve that communication. You know, we know there are certain practices where people extend the amount of time they can sit underwater and change their body temperature and change their pulse rate and things like that. I find it completely plausible that there are ways to communicate in that way to other cells in the body. Also, there is the field of hypnodermatology, where people by hypnosis try to treat various skin diseases, some of which have a neuroimmune component, some of which may not have a neuroimmune component. So the activity of the mind, which is simply the execution of the physiological computations that happen in the brain, affect physiological computations that happen outside the brain. I don't think that's particularly a stretch at all.
We may overlook intelligence in other types of matter or at different scales because we expect life and consciousness to look a certain way. Recognizing intelligence as a spectrum could reveal new forms of consciousness, where thought and agency emerge in both organic and inorganic systems, even as self-organizing patterns and unexpected materials. These ideas resonate with ancient views in cultures like the Chukchi of Siberia and Koyukon Indians, where every being, human, animal, object, or spirit, is believed to have its own perspective or eyes observing the world. This idea is further reflected in Andean cultures with their wakas or ancient Egyptian kneaders, where natural elements like hills, springs, and stones were seen as aware and personified. It also gets us closer to the much bigger mysteries of life.
Somehow, whatever our consciousness is, whether you're a materialist like a neurosurgeon or you're a spiritualist, doesn't matter. Your consciousness still sits somewhere in that space-time. Now, the open question is it independent of the body? Right? Does it, once created, is it now a pattern that can exist forever? It's a drawing of complexities of reality, and how these complexities of reality as organized by biological organisms can create a structure, our brain, that is sort of the birthplace of consciousness. But the math says, at least in his view of the world, the math says that once created, it doesn't need the structure anymore. Like a flower creates a seed, the seed doesn't require the flower anymore. The seed can go elsewhere. It's a postulate. It's an interesting idea, and it's backed by a lot of math that the physicists will argue about forever. But, to me, that's an interesting idea, that there is a physics support for the notion that consciousness can exist independent of what created the consciousness in the first place. To me, that's exciting. Now, whether that consciousness goes on to another place, and we can all read the books about the Monroe Institute, for instance, and this notion that there's people have out-of-body experiences and things.
These living patterns then can be an important fundamental principle in the universe. And things like archetypes, thought forms, and other psychological or parapsychological categories may be better understood as emergent, self-reinforcing patterns of agency. These patterns are not bound to traditional definitions of life or consciousness, like a thing, but exist as dynamic, evolving processes. That's how Vojevodsky, mathematician at Princeton, put it. At first, about a very general idea that was difficult for me to accept, but based on all the experience that I have been put through over the past 5 years, I could not think of anything else. There are non-human intelligences around us. By the word intelligence here, I mean an information system that has memory, motivations, the ability to model the external world and to plan it. They are not alien, but native to Earth, and most likely, evolutionarily older than humans. These minds actively and sometimes negatively affect people's lives. The non-human intelligences who seemed to be some kind of distant relatives of humankind. These ideas make us rethink life, intelligence, and the self. They suggest that thinking may exist far beyond just humans and bodies, possibly in non-living things, inorganic objects, or even short-lived patterns. Now, how do we define what's living and what's not then? What counts as an individual? Professor David Krakauer and his colleagues proposed that there are more fundamental individuals than the seemingly living or non-living forms of life around us. This individuality is defined by their ability to transmit adaptive information through time. They think these individuals don't have to be living organisms. They only need to pass on useful solutions to future generations. Individuals are dynamical processes that encode adaptive information, they say. In traditional views on the origin of life, replication, like how genes copy within cells, is key. But as seen with fireballs, replication can take many other forms. Copying a gene in a cell is just a chemical way to mimic the flow of information in living organisms. Even within biology, there are many types of individuals. Viruses that use host cells for replication, microbes that share genes across cells, and social insects like bees, where workers help a queen produce offspring. So how do we find this new type of individuals? Scientists propose to consider how different objects in our universe are detected at different wavelengths of light. Quote, "Many features of life, such as the heat signatures of metabolic activity, become visible only at higher wavelengths. Others, such as carbon flux, are visible at lower wavelengths. In the same way, individuals are detected by different informational frequencies." End of quote. They suggest that every life form has its own unique frequency or vibration, if you will, placing it on the continuum. When you observe a human from a distance, it appears to be a single coordinated entity. But when examined up close, this individual is actually made up of various independent agents, tissues, cells, and proteins, each with its own agenda. There are different levels of individuality. But there is a problem. If the physical origin and evolution of the universe is purely a mechanical computational process, as reflected in our bodily functions, then life would be reduced to basic processes like computation, replication, and metabolism. However, we are more than our hardware or bio-costumes. We, as collective intelligences, mirror the structure of the universe, where its higher intelligence, just like within us, might be distributed across smaller agents working together. Nobel laureate Hannes Alfvén echoed this idea, describing cosmic plasma as cellular and connected by plasma cables, cosmic arteries that transfer energy and information, defining distinct zones much like cells in living organisms. Ancient cultures also viewed the universe as a unified living organism. This perspective hints at a missing puzzle in the pure mechanical view of the universe: life. It is an active, living matter that brings adaptability and purpose. Life as we saw it can manifest not only in organic, but also in inorganic forms. This suggests that the universe itself might be alive. It can be a self-organizing computational system with its superintelligence emerging across all scales of space and time. Its smaller agents are distributed in all living beings, which, beyond their mechanical processes, are creators of meaning. Its consciousness is not an emergent property, but the fundamental medium of existence of life. From this point of view, organic species represent just a local node in a vast, recursive network of such cosmic superintelligence. There is also another, probably the most intriguing part. As Sandaloviciu's work suggests, complex plasma processes may have led to exotic forms of life manifestation, not only on our planet, but in other worlds as well. This implies that our search for extraterrestrial life and unconventional intelligence on Earth requires a complete rethinking. The cell-like spheres we describe could be at the origin of other forms of life we have not yet considered, he states. There is life out there, but not as we know it.